the Venezuelan government has placed a high priority on these social missions in order to ensure that healthcare, education, housing gets directly to the people. But importantly, these social missions has had as a determining factor the self-organisation and mobilisation of the people in order to carry out these fundamental tasks in redistributing the wealth in Venezuelan society and beginning to lay the foundations for a society whose explicit aim is a socialism of the 21st century. One of these social missions is the Mission Tree, or Mission Árbol in Spanish. It was set up in 2006 and has set itself the target of reforestation by planting 1 million trees by the time of 2011, and is well on its way to reaching this target. But as I said, like with many of the other social missions, these have relied not just on government functionaries to go out into the areas and plant trees, but on the self-organisation of the local communities who have used these opportunities to go out and educate and mobilise the people to be part of this process of reforesting Venezuela. It is this kind of inspiring self-activity, working together with the government to create a new society, that it also helps to explain why these countries and why these governments and people's movements are not just playing a fundamental role within their own countries, but also internationally in providing a political alternative, providing projections and statements and very clear demands on how we can begin to move towards a different system. And here I wanted to focus on 5 of the major points that were raised both by President Chavez but also by President Morales at the Copenhagen summit. The first one is that we have to accept that the equilibrium between humanity and nature has been broken, and that in order to re-establish this harmony, we need to begin to recognise that just as humans and humanity have rights, Mother Earth also has rights. They also stated very clearly that we need to move towards changing this system of consumption and production that is geared towards profit, that is the capitalist system, towards a new type of system where production is geared towards the needs of society. Thirdly, they very clearly laid the blame on who has been creating these problems, and demanding that the developed countries reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in order to ensure that temperature does not rise above 1 degree Celsius. As many scientists have noted, that temperature rise above 1 degree Celsius could be catastrophic for the future of humanity. And in his speech, Chavez made this clear, and the role that the industrialised nations have to play in this attempt to create a new society, when he said that we should never forget that 500 million richest people, that is 500 million people, 7% of the world's population, is responsible for 50% of greenhouse gas emissions, while the poorest 50% of the world's population accounts for simply 7% of those emissions. Evo Morales and Hugo Chavez also made very clear that we needed to redirect that funding that governments have been putting towards war and military defence spending towards the environment. And here Chavez denounced the fact that while Obama made the mere and almost shameful and disgraceful projection of $10 billion per year to be directed towards climate change, Chavez talked about the fact that this should be compared to the $700 billion that the US is currently spending on military, and including in a very direct threat to the ALBA project and the revolutionary process unfolding in Venezuela, that spending that is now being used for the 7 new military bases in Colombia, to which we can add the 2 military bases in Panama, the bases in Aruba and Curacao, the 10,000 troops now stationed in Haiti, the regular airspace and violations of land territory in Venezuela, both by US planes, drones and Colombian soldiers, and the infiltration that has been occurring over the last 7 years, if not longer, of Colombian paramilitaries into Venezuelan territory as preparation for a possible military intervention in order to bring to a halt this process of change in Venezuela that is inspiring so many around the world. And a fifth proposal that was put forward was the question of a climate justice tribunal, that those countries and companies that had been responsible for creating the crisis that we lived in had to face trial and will have to pay for what they have done to Mother Earth and humanity. And I think in this context, one of the most important proposals made by President Evo Morales in his speech at Copenhagen, and I think one that many of us should begin to think about how we can bring that here, whether it be here in Canada, whether it be here in Venezuela, in Australia where I spend a lot of my time and where I grew up, or all of the other countries in the world. And that is, if we understand that the problems cannot and will not be resolved in summits that bring together the governments of industrialised nations who prefer to put the interest of profit and business before the interest of the environment and people, then we should let the people decide. And it's in this context that Evo Morales raised the proposal of a global referendum. And he suggested in this context those 5 points that I mentioned as the initial proposal of what these 5 questions could be in a proposal that they will take to that I understand will be taken to the United Nations and will also be taken and be discussed at the People's Climate Summit that the Bolivian government is convoking for April, between April 20 and 22 in the city of Cochabamba. I think this proposal is extremely important, amongst the many other things, of course, that a lot of environmental groups have been doing, are planning to do, and will most likely take up in the future in their campaign, in this global campaign that is emerging around the issue of climate change. And I think the fundamental aspect of this proposal is that it very much is a proposal that can bring together those forces that I mentioned at the start, that are the ones that emerged at the Copenhagen summit and that are beginning to be those real forces for change to build this new system we need. And so I suppose that's what I wanted to convey in my brief comments today to kick off the discussion. That while Copenhagen was undoubtedly a failure, there was no ability to reach even the most minimal compromise or commitment there. What we saw was that beginning of an important battle that has shown to us which are the allies on our side and which are those that we need to be fighting against if we're serious to make a reality that slogan, let's not change the climate, let's change the system. So thank you very much for your time.